Captain Jake Martinez stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel Harvest Moon, watching the stars through the large viewing window. The ship had been traveling through space for 3 weeks, mapping new trade routes between Earth and the outer colonies. Jake had been doing this job for 5 years now, ever since humanity joined the Galactic Council. It was still hard to believe that humans were part of something so big. Just 20 years ago, people on Earth thought they were alone in the universe. Now Jake regularly worked with aliens from dozens of different worlds. Some looked almost human, while others were so strange that talking to them required special computer programs. The communication system on the bridge started beeping. Jake's second officer, Lieutenant Carol White, turned to face him. "Captain, we're getting an urgent message from Centauri Prime. It's marked as Emergency Priority 1. Jake frowned. Emergency Priority 1 meant something very serious was happening. He had only seen that code used twice before, and both times it meant war was about to start somewhere in the galaxy. "Put it on the main screen," Jake ordered. The viewing window changed to show the face of Admiral Keith Voren, one of the highest-ranking officers in the Galactic Council. The alien looked like a tall, thin human with blue skin and 4 arms. His usually calm expression showed worry and fear. "Captain Martinez," Admiral Keith Voren said, "you must return to Centauri Prime immediately. We are calling all Council representatives for an emergency meeting. The situation is worse than anything we have faced before." The message ended, leaving Jake and his crew staring at each other. Carol spoke first. "Captain, what do you think is happening?" "I don't know," Jake replied, "but we better find out fast. Set course for Centauri Prime. Maximum speed." 3 days later, the Harvest Moon arrived at the capital world of the Galactic Council. Centauri Prime was a beautiful planet with floating cities that hung in the sky like jewels. Jake had visited many times, but he never got tired of seeing the amazing technology that kept entire cities floating among the clouds. As their ship approached the main spaceport, Jake could see hundreds of other vessels from across the galaxy. Every member species had sent their representatives. This was bigger than Jake had thought. Ambassador Lisa Parker was waiting for Jake when he arrived at the council building. Lisa was one of Earth's most experienced diplomats, and she had been representing humanity in the Galactic Council since they first joined. She was a small woman with gray hair, but Jake had seen her argue with aliens twice her size and win. "Jake, thank goodness you're here," Lisa said as they walked through the halls of the massive building. "The situation is terrible. I've never seen the council members so frightened." "What's happening?" Jake asked. Lisa stopped walking and turned to face him. "It's something called the Void Blight. It's destroying food production across 17 star systems. Billions of people are going to starve if we don't find a solution soon." Jake felt his stomach drop. 17 star systems meant hundreds of worlds and billions of people. How is that possible? "These civilizations have been growing food for thousands of years." "Nobody knows," Lisa replied. "The blight appeared 6 months ago and has been spreading ever since. It makes the soil dead. Nothing will grow where it touches. The affected worlds are already running out of stored food." They entered the main council chamber, a huge room with seats arranged in circles that went up toward the ceiling like a giant bowl. Representatives from every species in the galaxy were there, and Jake could see the fear on all their faces no matter what they looked like. The meeting began with reports from the affected systems. A tall insect-like Krillian spoke about entire hive worlds going silent as their food ran out. The crystalline Vorthak, who looked like living diamonds, explained how their mineral-based nutrition had become poisonous. Even the advanced Nexari, who could create food from basic chemicals, admitted their technology had failed. Jake listened as species after species described the same thing. The Void Blight had destroyed their ability to feed their people, and they were running out of time. The Zilithian Emperor, an ancient being who ruled the most powerful empire in the galaxy, stood to address the chamber. His voice was deep and commanding, and when he spoke, everyone listened. "We have calculated the available food resources across all unaffected systems," the Emperor said. "Even with complete rationing and immediate redistribution, we can only feed 60% of the affected population. The mathematics are clear. 40% must be sacrificed to save the rest." The chamber erupted in angry voices. Representatives shouted at each other in dozens of languages. Jake watched as some of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy argued about which people should live and which should die. Lisa stood up in the human section. She was tiny compared to most of the other representatives, but her voice carried clearly across the chamber. The Galactic Council recognizes Ambassador Parker of Earth. The arguing stopped, and thousands of alien eyes turned to look at the small human woman. Jake held his breath, wondering what Lisa was going to say. "Honored members of the Galactic Council," Lisa began, her voice steady and strong. "Humanity has listened to your reports and understands the scope of this crisis. We have heard your calculations and your proposed solutions." She paused, looking around the chamber at all the different species. "Humanity rejects the idea that anyone must die. We volunteer to feed the galaxy." The chamber fell completely silent. Jake could hear his own heartbeat in the quiet. Then slowly laughter began. First from the Zilithians, then from others. Soon most of the chamber was laughing at the small human who thought her tiny species could solve a problem that had stumped the greatest civilizations in the galaxy. The Krillian ambassador clicked his mandibles together in amusement. "Human, your species has been part of this council for only 20 years. You have 12 billion people on one world. How could you possibly feed 200 billion across hundreds of systems?" Lisa waited for the laughter to die down. When the chamber was quiet again, she smiled. "Because, honored ambassador, humans have been feeding growing populations for 10,000 years. We know how to make food grow anywhere, under any conditions. Give us 6 months and we will prove it." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He knew Lisa well enough to recognize that tone in her voice. She wasn't making an empty promise. Somehow, she believed humanity could actually do this impossible thing. The Emperor of the Zilithians leaned forward on his throne. "And if you fail, human, what happens to the billions who will die while we wait for your miracle?" Lisa's smile never wavered. "Then we will have tried something better than controlled murder. But we won't fail. Humanity feeds people. It's what we do." President Amy Johnson sat in the emergency meeting room deep under the White House. The room had no windows, but the walls were covered with screens showing images from across the galaxy. Each screen showed a different world where people were starting to starve. Amy had been president for 3 years, but nothing had prepared her for this. The weight of 200 billion lives seemed to press down on her shoulders like a mountain. Around the table sat the smartest people on Earth, all trying to figure out how to keep humanity's impossible promise. "Let's go over the numbers again," Amy said, rubbing her tired eyes. She had not slept in 2 days since Lisa Parker's message arrived from Centauri Prime. Secretary of Agriculture Ben Torres opened his tablet and began reading. "We need to feed approximately 200 billion people across 437 worlds and 17 star systems. The affected populations have different biology, so we need at least 50 different types of food. Most of their worlds can no longer grow anything due to the void blight." General Patricia Hayes, the head of Earth's Space Forces, shook her head. "Madam President, the logistics alone are impossible. We don't have enough ships to carry that much food, even if we could grow it. It would take our entire merchant fleet 3 years just to reach every affected world once." Amy looked around the table at the worried faces. These people had solved problems all their lives, but this seemed too big even for them. Then she noticed Dr. Rachel Kim sitting quietly at the end of the table. Rachel ran the Terra Agricultural Research Institute, and she had been taking notes while everyone else talked. "Dr. Kim," Amy said, "you've been quiet. What do you think?" Rachel looked up from her notes. She was a small woman with short black hair and thick glasses. She looked nervous, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Madam President, I think everyone is approaching this problem wrong," Rachel said. "We're not going to solve this by shipping food from Earth. We need to teach the galaxy how to grow food the way humans do." Ben Torres frowned. "Rachel, these are advanced civilizations. They've been farming for thousands of years longer than we have." "That's exactly the problem," Rachel replied, standing up and walking to one of the wall screens. "Look at these reports from the affected worlds. The Krillians grow food in massive single crop fields. The Vorthak extract nutrients from mineral deposits. The Nexari create food artificially in factories. When the void blight hit, it destroyed their entire food production because they put all their resources in one method." Rachel touched the screen, and it changed to show images from Earth. Fields of different crops growing next to each other, greenhouses stacked on top of each other, farms floating on the ocean. "Humans have always had to adapt," Rachel continued. "We've grown food in deserts, on mountains, in caves, even in space stations. We don't rely on one method. We use hundreds of different ways to grow food, and we're always inventing new ones. Amy leaned forward in her chair. What are you suggesting? We don't just send food, Rachel said, her voice getting stronger. We send farmers, engineers, and scientists. We build agricultural systems on their worlds using human methods. Vertical farms, hydroponics, soil rehabilitation, genetic modification of crops, insect farming, aquaculture. We teach them everything we know about growing food in impossible conditions. The room was quiet as everyone thought about Rachel's idea. Finally, General Hayes spoke. That might actually work, but we'd need to move fast. How quickly could we set up food production on an alien world? Rachel smiled for the first time since the meeting began. Give me the right team and equipment, and I can have crops growing in 6 weeks. 2 weeks later, Captain Jake Martinez stood in the cargo bay of his ship, but it looked completely different. Where once there had been empty space for carrying trade goods, now there were thousands of boxes filled with seeds, farming equipment, and scientific instruments. The Harvest Moon had been converted into humanity's first food fleet vessel. Jake's crew had been expanded too. Along with his regular officers, he now had 12 agricultural engineers, 6 soil scientists, 4 geneticists, and 2 expert farmers. Leading the team was Dr. Sam Collins, one of Rachel Kim's best students. Captain, Sam said, walking up to Jake with a tablet in his hands. We're ready to depart for Kepler 442b. The Alterian government has agreed to let us attempt food production on their world. Jake nodded, but he felt nervous. The Alterians were known throughout the galaxy as proud warriors. They had ruled a dozen star systems until the Void Blight destroyed their agricultural worlds. Now they were facing starvation, but Jake wondered if they would really accept help from humans. What do we know about their world? Jake asked. Heavy atmosphere, about twice Earth normal, Sam replied. 3 suns, so the growing season never really ends. The soil used to be very fertile before the blight hit. The Alterians themselves are humanoid but much larger than us, about 8 feet tall on average. They eat mostly grains and vegetables. The trip to Kepler 442b took 5 days. When they arrived, Jake could see that it had once been a beautiful world. There were cities built into mountainsides and vast plains that should have been covered with crops. Instead, everything was brown and dead. The Void Blight had turned the entire planet into a wasteland. The Alterians who met them at the spaceport looked thin and hungry. Their leader was War Chief Zarn, a massive alien with gray skin and 6 arms. He wore armor even though there was no battle to fight, and Jake could see the suspicion in his 4 eyes. Humans, Zarn said in a deep voice. We agreed to let you try your methods, but we do not expect success. Our scientists have tested the soil for months. Nothing will grow here now. Sam stepped forward carrying a small device that looked like a metal detector. War Chief, with your permission, I'd like to scan a section of your farmland. Zarn gestured to the dead fields around the spaceport. Scan wherever you wish. It is all equally dead. Sam walked to the nearest field and ran his device over the brown soil. After a few minutes, he returned with a smile on his face. Captain, the blight has only affected the top 3 feet of soil. Below that, the earth is still healthy. We can work with this. Over the next few hours, Jake watched his team set up equipment that he barely understood. They dug deep holes and planted strange seeds that Rachel's lab had created specifically for heavy atmosphere worlds. They set up irrigation systems and mixed chemicals into the soil. Zarn and his warriors watched everything with doubt written on their faces. Human, Zarn said to Jake, your people work hard, but dead soil cannot be brought back to life. Jake looked at the Alterian leader and remembered what Lisa Parker had said to the Galactic Council. War Chief, humans have been making impossible things possible for a long time. Give us a chance to show you. 3 weeks later, Jake stood in the same field with Zarn and Sam, but now instead of brown dirt, there were rows of green plants reaching toward the 3 suns of Kepler 442b. The modified corn was already 2 feet tall, and the soy plants were beginning to flower. Zarn stared at the growing crops in amazement. He reached down and touched one of the corn plants as if he could not believe it was real. How is this possible? He asked in a whisper. Sam grinned and pulled an ear of corn from one of the plants. War Chief, this corn has been modified to thrive in your atmosphere and soil conditions. The root system goes deep enough to avoid the blight layer, and the plant actually helps clean the soil as it grows. In 6 more weeks, you'll have enough food to feed 1,000 people from just this one field. For the first time since they had arrived, Zarn smiled. Human Collins, I owe you an apology. I did not believe your people could do what you promised. Jake put his hand on the big alien's shoulder. War Chief, this is just the beginning. We're going to teach your people how to do this themselves. Soon your whole world will be green again. News of the success on Kepler 442b spread across the galaxy faster than anyone expected. Within days of the first Alterian harvest, dozens of other species were sending requests to Earth for agricultural assistance. President Amy Johnson found herself coordinating the largest humanitarian mission in human history. Dr. Rachel Kim stood in her laboratory on Earth, surrounded by samples of soil, water, and plant matter from dozens of alien worlds. Each species had different needs, and she was working 18 hours a day to develop solutions for all of them. The thalassans need aquatic crops, she said to her assistant, Dr. Nancy Brown, while examining a sample under her microscope. Their whole civilization lives on floating cities in a planet-wide ocean. Traditional land farming won't work for them at all. Nancy looked at the data on her computer screen. What about modified kelp? We could engineer it to grow faster and produce more nutrients. Perfect, Rachel replied. And the Parathi live on volcanic worlds where the surface temperature reaches 200 degrees. We need something that can grow in extreme heat. The door to the laboratory opened and Captain Jake Martinez walked in. He had just returned from Kepler 442b, where he had left Dr. Sam Collins and his team to establish permanent farming operations with the Alterians. Dr. Kim, Jake said, I have a new assignment. The Thalassan government has agreed to let us try aquatic farming on their world. They're desperate. The void blight somehow got into their ocean and killed most of their sea plants. Rachel nodded and handed Jake a sealed container. These are modified kelp seeds, designed specifically for their world. Dr. Chris Evans will be leading your agricultural team. He's our best marine biologist. 2 weeks later, Jake found himself standing on the deck of a floating platform in the middle of an endless blue ocean. The planet Thalassa had no land at all, just water that stretched to the horizon in every direction. The Thalassan cities floated on the surface like giant lily pads connected by bridges and tunnels. Dr. Chris Evans was already in the water, wearing a special diving suit that let him breathe underwater. The Thalassans themselves looked like tall, thin humans with gills on their necks and webbed fingers. They could live both above and below the water, but they got most of their food from sea plants that the void blight had destroyed. Captain, Chris called from the water, the ocean floor here is perfect for kelp farming. The blight only affected the surface plants. If we go deep enough, we can establish growing areas that will be safe. The Thalassan leader, Sea Mother Coral, swam up to the platform. Her skin was blue-green like the ocean, and she moved through the water more gracefully than any human could move on land. Human Evans, she said, her voice making musical sounds like water flowing over stones. Our people have farmed these waters for 3,000 years. How can your land-dwelling species help us in our own element? Chris smiled and held up one of Rachel's modified kelp seeds. Sea Mother, humans have been farming in water almost as long as we've been farming on land. We raise fish, grow seaweed, and even farm in rice paddies that are underwater half the year. Let me show you something new. Over the next month, Jake watched Chris and his team work with the Thalassans to create underwater farms unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The modified kelp grew in vertical columns that reached from the ocean floor to the surface. Each column could feed 100 Thalassans, and they also cleaned the water as they grew. But the real breakthrough came when the kelp started producing oxygen. The Thalassan cities had been running out of breathable air for their surface areas. But the new farms created so much oxygen that they actually improved the atmosphere. This is impossible, Sea Mother Coral said as she watched the kelp forest spreading across the ocean floor on the monitoring screens. We have never seen plants grow so fast or produce so much food. Chris grinned and pointed to the readings. Sea Mother, each kelp plant is actually a combination of earth seaweed and Thalassan watergrass. We took the best parts of both and created something new. It grows in your water, but it produces 10 times more food than either plant could alone. Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, engineer Maya Patel was facing a very different challenge. The volcanic world of Pirion was so hot that water boiled on the surface, and the air was filled with poisonous gases. The Parathi people lived in underground cities carved into the rock, but the void blight had somehow gotten into their underground farms. Maya stood in a cave deep below the planet's surface, wearing a protective suit to keep out the heat and toxic air. The Parathi looked like living rocks with glowing red eyes, and they ate a type of mushroom that could grow in extreme heat. Human Patel, said Stone Chief Magma. The leader of the largest Parathi city. Our food-growing caves have been dead for 4 months. Our people are eating their emergency supplies, but those will not last much longer. Maya examined the cave walls with her instruments. Stone Chief, the blight created a toxic layer in your soil, but I think we can work around it. We'll need to dig deeper and create entirely new growing chambers. Over the following weeks, Maya and her team worked with Parathi miners to carve out new underground farms. But instead of the traditional mushroom beds, they created something revolutionary. Multi-level growing systems that use the planet's natural heat as an energy source. The mushrooms we've developed, Maya explained to Stone Chief Magma as they watched the first crops growing in the new caves, are actually a hybrid of earth fungi and your native heat mushrooms. They grow faster than anything your people have seen, and they can survive temperatures that would kill most living things. The Parathi leader touched one of the growing mushrooms with his rocky finger. These plants seem to glow brighter than our old food mushrooms. That's because they're more nutritious, Maya replied. Each mushroom contains enough vitamins and minerals to feed a Parathi for a whole day. Your people will be healthier than they've ever been. Back on Earth, President Amy Johnson received daily reports from agricultural teams working on dozens of worlds. Each team faced unique challenges, but they were all succeeding. Human farmers were teaching aliens how to grow food in conditions that seemed impossible. But not everyone in the galaxy was happy about humanity's success. In the capital city of the Zilithian Empire, Emperor Vast Kronos met with his council of advisors. The Zilithians had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years, and they were not pleased to see humans becoming so important so quickly. The humans are gaining influence too rapidly, said General Keth Morvat, the Emperor's military commander. Every species they help becomes grateful to them instead of loyal to us. Emperor Vast Kronos nodded slowly. Yes, and their success makes our own scientists look incompetent. How could we, with all our advanced technology, fail to solve a problem that these young humans handle so easily? Perhaps we should demand that they share their agricultural technology with us, suggested science advisor Quinn Delta. The Emperor considered this. No, that would make us look weak. But we will watch them carefully. If the humans become too powerful, we may need to remind the galaxy who really rules here. On the other side of galactic space, an even more dangerous discussion was taking place. Admiral Vex Korvat of the hegemony of Drac paced back and forth in his war room, studying reports from across the affected systems. The hegemony was a military alliance that controlled dozens of worlds through fear and force. They made their money by selling weapons and protection to smaller species. But now, instead of buying weapons to fight over scarce food, species were working together to solve their problems peacefully. The humans are destroying our business model, Admiral Vex Korvat growled to his officers. Species that were ready to go to war 6 months ago are now sharing agricultural technology and trading food supplies. If this continues, no one will need our military services. Commander Stelvorth, his second-in-command, pulled up data on a large screen. Admiral, our weapons sales have dropped by 70% in the affected systems. Even worse, some of our client species are asking to break their protection contracts so they can spend the money on farming equipment instead. Admiral Vex Korvat stopped pacing and stared at the screen. Then we need to make sure the humans fail. If we can destroy their agricultural operations, the galaxy will return to fighting over resources, and we'll be back in business. He turned to face his officers with a cruel smile. Begin intelligence gathering on all human agricultural operations. Find their weaknesses. Soon we'll show the galaxy what happens to species that try to change the natural order of things. But Admiral Vex Korvat had made one crucial mistake. He assumed that the humans' success was just luck, and that destroying their farms would solve his problem. He didn't understand that humanity's real strength wasn't their technology or their crops. It was their willingness to share knowledge and work together with anyone who needed help. And across the galaxy, that willingness was creating something the hegemony had never faced before, a united community of species who were no longer afraid of each other because they were no longer fighting over scarce resources. Commander Elena Rodriguez was checking the morning reports from the orbital farms around Nexus 7 when the attack began. The farming stations had been operating for 3 months, successfully growing food for 3 different alien species whose worlds had been destroyed by the Void Blight. Commander, called Lieutenant David Park from the communication station, I'm detecting multiple ships approaching at high speed. They're not responding to our identification requests. Elena looked at the tactical display and felt her stomach drop. 12 warships were moving toward the farming stations in attack formation. She recognized the design. They were hegemony vessels, painted in the dark colors that meant they were on a military mission. All stations, this is Commander Rodriguez, Elena said into her communicator. We have hostile ships approaching. Begin emergency evacuation procedures immediately. Get the civilian workers to the escape pods, but it was too late. The hegemony ships opened fire before Elena could finish her warning. Bright energy beams lanced out from the warships, striking the farming platforms and greenhouses. In seconds, tons of grain and vegetables that were meant to feed the starving Vrex colonies were burning in space. Elena watched in horror as 3 of the orbital farms exploded, taking with them 6 months of work and enough food to feed 50,000 people. Her own command station shook as weapons fire struck its outer hull. "Elena, we need to get out of here now," shouted Dr. Kevin Walsh, the lead agricultural scientist on the station. He was helping evacuate his research team, carrying boxes of irreplaceable seed samples. "Not yet," Elena replied, her hands flying over the control panels. "I'm downloading all our agricultural data first. They can destroy our stations, but they're not getting our research." The hegemony ships continued their attack for 10 more minutes, systematically destroying every farming platform in the system. When they were finished, they broadcast a message across all frequencies. "This is Admiral Vex Korvat of the Hegemony of Drac," the message began. Elena could see the alien's cruel face on her communication screen. He looked like a large human with pale gray skin and completely black eyes. "Let this be a lesson to all species who trust the humans. Their promise to feed the galaxy is a lie designed to make you dependent on them. We have destroyed their farms at Nexus 7, Centauri, and Alpha Prime. Soon we will destroy them all." Elena felt rage building inside her chest. The hegemony had just condemned thousands of innocent people to starvation, and they were acting like they had done something heroic. Captain Jake Martinez received the news 3 hours later while his ship was traveling to the Arcturus system. The Harvest Moon had been converted into a mobile agricultural command center, and Jake was coordinating farming operations across a dozen star systems. "How many people were killed?" Jake asked Elena over the communication link. Elena's face on the screen looked tired and angry. 43 agricultural workers died in the attack, Jake. But that's not the worst part. The food they destroyed was supposed to feed the Vrex colonies for the next 6 months. Without it, 20,000 Vrex will starve before we can establish new farms. Jake clenched his fists. He had met many of the Vrex refugees, and they were gentle people who had already lost their homeworld to the Void Blight. Now they might die because the hegemony wanted to prove a point. "Elena, what's the status of our other agricultural operations?" "So far, only 3 systems were attacked," Elena replied. "But Admiral Vex Korvat is broadcasting propaganda across the galaxy, claiming that humans are using food as a weapon to control other species. Some of the Galactic Council members are starting to believe him." The situation got worse over the next few days. The Zilithian Empire announced that they were reviewing their support for the human agricultural mission. Several smaller species withdrew their requests for farming assistance, afraid that the hegemony would attack them too. Even some of humanity's allies began to have doubts. War Chief Zarn of the Alterians sent a message to Earth asking whether the human food program was really about humanitarian aid, or if there was a hidden political purpose. President Amy Johnson called an emergency meeting with her advisors. The conference room in the White House was filled with worried faces as they discussed how to respond to the hegemony's attacks and accusations. "We need to increase security for our agricultural operations," said General Patricia Hayes. "I can assign military escorts to our farming ships." "No," Amy replied firmly. "The moment we start sending warships to protect our food programs, we prove the hegemony's point. They'll say we're using military force to expand human influence." Dr. Rachel Kim looked up from her research tablet. "Madam President, I think there's something else we should consider. I've been analyzing the Void Blight samples from different worlds, and I found something strange." Amy turned to face Rachel. "What kind of strange?" Rachel stood up and activated the wall screen, showing microscopic images of the blight organism. "The blight isn't natural. It's a biological weapon, and a very sophisticated one. Look at these genetic markers." The screen showed complex molecular structures that meant nothing to most people in the room, but Amy could see the excitement in Rachel's eyes. Rachel, are you saying someone created the void blight on purpose? I'm saying the genetic evidence suggests artificial modification, Rachel replied carefully. But I need more samples to be completely sure. If I'm right, then this whole crisis was caused deliberately to create chaos and starvation. General Hayes leaned forward in her chair. Doctor, if the blight was created as a weapon, who would have the technology to do something like that? Rachel looked uncomfortable. The genetic techniques required are very advanced. Only a few species in the galaxy have that capability. The Nexari, possibly the Zilithians, and... She paused. And who else? Amy asked. The hegemony of Drac, Rachel said quietly. They have some of the most advanced biological warfare research in the galaxy. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. If Rachel was right, then the hegemony hadn't just attacked the human agricultural missions. They had created the entire starvation crisis in the first place. We need proof, Amy said finally. Accusations aren't enough. If we're going to expose the hegemony, we need evidence that will convince the Galactic Council. Meanwhile, on the hegemony flagship Dominance, Admiral Vex Korvat was meeting with his scientific advisor, Dr. Mex Thalan. The alien scientist looked nervous as he presented his report. Admiral, the human agricultural techniques are more effective than we predicted, Dr. Mex Thalan said, his voice shaking slightly. Even after our attacks, they're establishing new farms faster than we can destroy them. Some of their methods are so simple that local populations can implement them without human help. Admiral Vex Korvat slammed his fist on the table. Then we need to escalate. What about releasing a new strain of the blight? Sir, that would be extremely dangerous, the scientist replied. If we modify the blight too much, we might lose control of it completely. It could spread to our own worlds. Then what do you suggest? Dr. Mexthalan pulled up tactical displays of human operations. We should target their research centers and key personnel. If we can eliminate their top scientists and agricultural experts, their program will collapse. The Admiral smiled coldly. Good. Begin planning strikes on their main research facilities. And prepare a special mission to eliminate this Dr. Rachel Kim. According to our intelligence, she's the key to their success. But Admiral Vex Korvat had underestimated human determination. Across the galaxy, human agricultural teams continued their work despite the attacks. On Thalassa, Dr. Chris Evans expanded the kelp farming operations and began training Thalassan scientists to manage them independently. On Pirion, Maya Patel helped the Pirathi establish mushroom farms in dozens of underground cities. Most importantly, the success of the human agricultural program was creating something the hegemony hadn't expected: cooperation between species that had been enemies for centuries. The Krillians and the Vorthak, who had fought 3 wars in the past 100 years, were now working together to establish joint farming colonies. The galaxy was changing, and no amount of military force could stop it. But the hegemony was going to try, and their next attack would target the heart of the human agricultural program. Earth itself, Captain Jake Martinez, received the intelligence report while his ship was orbiting the farming world of New Eden. The message was marked with the highest security classification, and it came directly from President Johnson herself. Jake, the president's recorded message said, "We have reliable intelligence that the hegemony is planning a major attack on our agricultural research facilities on Earth. We're evacuating non-essential personnel and increasing security. But we need you to do something else. We need you to find proof that the hegemony created the Void Blight. Without that evidence, we can't expose their crimes to the Galactic Council." Jake stared at the message for a long time after it ended. Finding evidence would mean infiltrating hegemony territory, one of the most dangerous places in the galaxy. But if they succeeded, they could end this crisis once and for all. Dr. Rachel Kim was working late in her laboratory when the first explosion shook the building. She looked up from her microscope just as the emergency alarm started blaring throughout the Terra Agricultural Research Institute. "Dr. Kim, we need to evacuate immediately," shouted her assistant, Dr. Nancy Brown, as she ran into the laboratory. "Hegemony ships are attacking the facility." Rachel grabbed the most important research samples and data drives from her desk. 6 months of work studying the Void Blight was stored in those small devices, and she couldn't let the hegemony destroy it. As they ran through the corridors toward the emergency exits, Rachel could hear weapons fire from outside the building. Through the windows, she saw dark hegemony fighters strafing the research complex with energy weapons. The underground shelters, Nancy said, pointing toward a reinforced door marked with emergency symbols. We'll be safe there until Earth Defense Forces arrive. But as they reached the shelter entrance, Rachel stopped. Nancy, I can't hide in a bunker while they destroy everything we've worked for. The galaxy needs this research. Rachel, you'll be killed if you stay here. Rachel looked at her friend and colleague. Then you take the samples and get to safety. I'm going back to the lab. There's something I need to check in the Void Blight data, something that might prove the hegemony created it. Before Nancy could stop her, Rachel was running back toward her laboratory. She had noticed something strange in the genetic patterns of the latest blight samples, but she needed her main computer to analyze it properly. The building shook again as another explosion rocked the research facility. Rachel's lab was on the 3rd floor, and she could see hegemony soldiers moving through the corridors below. They were searching for something specific, or someone specific. Rachel reached her lab and immediately began working on her computer. The genetic analysis programs were complex, but she had been studying the Void Blight for months. If her theory was correct, she would find artificial modifications in the Blight's DNA structure. Minutes passed as the computer processed thousands of genetic sequences. Outside, the sounds of battle were getting closer. Rachel knew the hegemony soldiers would reach her floor soon. Then the computer finished its analysis, and Rachel stared at the results in amazement. The evidence was clear and undeniable. The Void Blight contained genetic markers that could only have been created in a laboratory. More than that, the modification techniques matched exactly with known hegemony biological warfare methods. Got you, Rachel whispered, copying the data to multiple storage devices. This was the proof they needed to expose the hegemony's crimes to the galaxy. The laboratory door exploded inward, and 3 hegemony soldiers entered with their weapons ready. Their leader, a tall alien with gray skin and black eyes, pointed his weapon at Rachel. Dr. Rachel Kim, the soldier said in accented English. You will come with us now. Admiral Vex Korvat wants to speak with you personally. Rachel looked at the armed soldiers and slowly raised her hands. But she had already hidden the data drives in her pocket. Whatever happened to her, the evidence would survive. Meanwhile, halfway across the galaxy, Captain Jake Martinez was leading a dangerous mission into hegemony territory. His ship, the Harvest Moon, had been equipped with advanced stealth technology and was approaching a secret hegemony research station. Captain, said Lieutenant Carol White from the navigation station, we're approaching the target coordinates. The research facility should be directly ahead. Jake looked at the tactical display. The hegemony station was hidden in an asteroid field, protected by automated defense systems and patrolling warships. Getting inside would be nearly impossible for a normal ship. But the Harvest Moon wasn't alone. War Chief Zarn of the Alterians had insisted on joining the mission personally. His ship, the Iron Spear, was designed for stealth operations and could slip past the hegemony's sensors undetected. Human Jake. Zarn's voice came over the communication system. My ship is in position. We will create a distraction while you infiltrate the research station. With Jake was a special team consisting of Dr. Sam Collins, the agricultural engineer who had first succeeded on the Alterian world, and Keth Prime, a brilliant Nexari scientist who had volunteered to help expose the hegemony's crimes. Remember, Jake said to his team as they prepared to board a small shuttle, we need evidence of biological warfare research. Computer files, laboratory samples, anything that proves the hegemony created the Void Blight. The infiltration went smoothly at first. Zarn's warriors attacked a hegemony patrol on the other side of the asteroid field, drawing away most of the station's defenses. Jake's team was able to dock with the research facility without being detected. Inside the station, they found laboratories filled with biological weapons. Research. Dr. Sam Collins used his scientific equipment to analyze samples while Keth Prime downloaded computer files with his advanced Nexari. Technology, Captain, Sam said quietly as he examined a sealed container. This is definitely a modified version of the Void Blight. The genetic structure has been artificially enhanced to be more destructive. Keth Prime's metallic voice echoed in the laboratory. Jake Martinez, I have found computer records of the entire biological warfare program. The hegemony has been developing the Void Blight for over 2 years. They released it deliberately to create the starvation crisis. But their mission was interrupted when hegemony security forces discovered their presence. Alarms began blaring throughout the station and armed soldiers started moving toward their location. "We need to go now," Jake said, gathering the evidence they had collected. "Zarn, we need extraction immediately." "On our way, Human Jake," came the reply from the Alterian war chief.
Hold your position for 2 more minutes. The team fought their way back to their shuttle, carrying vital evidence that could expose the hegemony's crimes.
But as they escaped from the research station, Jake received devastating news from Earth. "Captain Martinez," came President Johnson's voice over the emergency communication channel, "Dr. Rachel Kim has been captured by hegemony forces. They're holding her on their flagship, the Dominance. Intelligence suggests they plan to execute her as a warning to other human scientists." Jake felt anger and determination burning in his chest. Rachel Kim was not just a brilliant scientist. She had become a symbol of humanity's mission to feed the galaxy. If the hegemony executed her, it would be a message that no human was safe. "Madam President," Jake replied, "we have the evidence we need to expose the hegemony's creation of the Void Blight, but I request permission to attempt a rescue mission for Dr. Kim." "Jake, the Dominance is the most heavily defended ship in the hegemony fleet. It would be a suicide mission." "Maybe for one ship," Jake said, looking at the tactical displays showing the locations of human and allied vessels throughout the galaxy. "But what if we could coordinate a galaxy-wide response? Every species that has been helped by our agricultural program, every world that we've taught to grow food again." President Johnson was quiet for a moment. "What are you proposing?" "We broadcast the evidence of hegemony biological warfare to every world in the galaxy, simultaneously. We show them proof that the starvation crisis was deliberately created by the people who are now claiming to protect them. And then we ask for their help to rescue the woman who has saved billions of lives." On the hegemony flagship Dominance, Dr. Rachel Kim sat in a detention cell, but she wasn't afraid. She had managed to transmit her research data to Dr. Nancy Brown before her capture, and she knew that humanity's agricultural mission would continue, even if she didn't survive. Admiral Vex Korvat entered her cell with 2 guards. His black eyes studied Rachel with cold hatred. "Dr. Kim," the Admiral said, "you and your species have caused considerable trouble for the hegemony. Our business model depends on controlled scarcity and military conflict. Your agricultural programs are creating peace and cooperation instead." Rachel looked up at the alien leader without fear. "Admiral, is that why you created the Void Blight? To maintain artificial scarcity?" Admiral Vex Korvat smiled cruelly. "Very good, Doctor. Yes, we created the Blight to destabilize the galaxy and increase demand for our military services. It was a perfect plan until your people interfered. You murdered billions of innocent people for profit," Rachel said, her voice filled with quiet anger. "I maintained the natural order of the galaxy," the Admiral replied. "The strong rule, the weak serve or die. Your species is trying to change that, making the weak believe they deserve to live without serving their betters." Rachel stood up and faced the hegemony leader directly. "Admiral, you made one crucial mistake. You assumed that strength comes from the ability to destroy. But real strength comes from the ability to create and nurture life. That's something you'll never understand." Admiral Vex Korvat's smile faded. "We shall see, Doctor. In 6 hours you will be executed, and your death will be broadcast across the galaxy as a warning to anyone who opposes the hegemony." But as the Admiral left her cell, Rachel smiled. She had seen something in his black eyes that he probably didn't realize he had revealed. Fear. The hegemony was afraid of what humanity represented, afraid of a galaxy where people worked together instead of fighting over scraps. And across the galaxy, that fear was about to become reality. Human. The emergency transmission went out to every inhabited world in the galaxy at exactly the same time. On Zentari Prime, in the floating cities of Thalassa, in the underground caverns of Pirion, and on hundreds of other worlds, the same message played on every communication device. President Amy Johnson appeared on screens across the galaxy, standing next to a holographic display showing genetic analysis data. Behind her were representatives from dozens of species who had benefited from human agricultural programs. "Citizens of the galaxy," President Johnson began, "6 months ago, your worlds faced starvation due to something called the Void Blight. Humanity offered to help, and together we have begun to solve this crisis. But today we have learned a terrible truth. The holographic display changed to show complex genetic structures and laboratory data. The Void Blight was not a natural disaster. It was a biological weapon created deliberately by the hegemony of Drac to cause artificial scarcity and justify their military expansion. Across the galaxy, billions of people watched in shock and growing anger as the evidence was presented. The genetic markers were clear, and the connection to hegemony biological warfare techniques was undeniable. War Chief Zarn of the Alterians stepped forward to speak. The hegemony murdered my people to sell us weapons. They destroyed our worlds to make us dependent on their protection. This cannot stand. Sea Mother Coral of the Thalassans was next. They poisoned our oceans and then told us it was natural. They watched our children starve while planning to profit from our desperation. One by one, representatives from affected species spoke out. The proud Krillians, the ancient Vorthak, the technologically advanced Nixari, all united in their condemnation of the hegemony's crimes. President Johnson returned to address the camera directly. The hegemony has captured Dr. Rachel Kim, the lead scientist who discovered their crimes. They plan to execute her in 3 hours as a warning to anyone who opposes them. We cannot allow this to happen. The transmission ended with coordinates and tactical information. Within minutes, ships began moving throughout the galaxy. On the bridge of the Harvest Moon, Captain Jake Martinez watched his tactical display fill with green dots representing Allied vessels. The response was overwhelming. Captain, Lieutenant Carol White reported, I'm counting over 3,000 ships converging on the hegemony flagship's location. Alterian warships, Thalassan defense fleets, Krillian battle swarms, even civilian vessels with agricultural teams aboard. Jake nodded grimly. Signal all ships. We coordinate our approach in 1 hour. This isn't just about rescuing Dr. Kim anymore. This is about stopping the hegemony's biological warfare program permanently. Aboard the hegemony flagship Dominance, Admiral Vex Corvat stared at his tactical screens in disbelief. His ship was surrounded by the largest fleet in galactic history, and they were all there for one human scientist. Admiral, his communication officer reported, we're receiving transmission requests from over 50 different species. They're demanding we release Dr. Rachel Kim and surrender our biological warfare research. Impossible, Admiral Vex Corvat snarled. They wouldn't risk a galactic war over one human. But as he watched more ships arrive every minute, the Admiral began to understand something that terrified him. The galaxy had changed. Species that had been enemies for centuries were now working together, united by the simple act of sharing food and agricultural knowledge. Commander Stelvorth entered the bridge with a worried expression. Admiral, our intelligence reports that these aren't just military vessels. Many of them are agricultural ships, research vessels, even merchant traders. These people aren't professional soldiers. Then they'll be easy to defeat, the Admiral replied, but his voice lacked confidence. Sir, that's not what concerns me. These people are fighting to protect their food supply, their families, their future. They're not fighting for conquest or profit. They're fighting for survival. In her detention cell, Dr. Rachel Kim could hear the sounds of activity throughout the ship. The hegemony crew was preparing for battle, but she could also hear something else, uncertainty and fear in their voices. The cell door opened, and Admiral Vex Corvat entered alone. His usual cruel confidence had been replaced by desperate anger. Dr. Kim, he said, your rescue fleet has arrived. Impressive, but ultimately pointless. We will destroy them all and broadcast your execution anyway. Rachel looked at the Admiral calmly. You still don't understand, do you? This isn't about me. This is about what we've created together. Humans and aliens working as partners instead of master and servant. Cooperation is weakness, Admiral Vex Corvat replied. The strong rule, the weak serve. That is the natural order. The natural order, Rachel said softly, is for living things to help each other survive. Plants and soil, farmers and crops, teachers and students. You've forgotten that strength comes from building up others, not tearing them down. The ship shuddered as the first energy blasts struck its shields. The battle had begun. On the bridge of his command ship, Captain Jake Martinez coordinated the massive fleet surrounding the Dominance. The plan was complex but simple. Multiple simultaneous attacks to overwhelm the hegemony's defenses, while specialized teams rescued Dr. Kim and secured the biological warfare research. All vessels. This is Martinez. Jake broadcast to the fleet. "Remember, our goal is to disable the dominance and rescue Dr. Kim. We're not here for revenge, we're here for justice." War Chief Zarn's voice came over the communication channel. "Human Jake, my warriors are ready to board the hegemony ship. We will find Dr. Kim." "Negative, Zarn," Jake replied. "This is a precision operation. Dr. Sam Collins will lead the rescue team. He knows the layout of hegemony research vessels from our intelligence mission." The battle was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of the usual brutal warfare between military fleets, this was a coordinated rescue operation involving hundreds of species working together with perfect precision. Thalasan ships used their advanced sensors to map the interior of the dominance. Krillian swarm fighters overwhelmed the hegemony's defensive screens. Nixari electronic warfare specialists disabled the flagship's weapon systems. And through it all, human agricultural ships stayed at the edges of the battle, ready to provide medical aid and evacuation support for anyone who needed it. Dr. Sam Collins led his rescue team through the corridors of the dominance, guided by Thalasan sensor data and protected by Altarian warriors. They encountered surprisingly little resistance. Most of the hegemony crew seemed more concerned with escaping than fighting. "Dr. Kim's cell should be just ahead," Sam said, checking his scanner. 2 guards at the detention block entrance. The Altarian warriors moved forward silently, disabling the guards without killing them. Minutes later, Sam was opening Rachel's cell door. "Dr. Kim," Sam said with a smile, "your taxi has arrived." Rachel laughed despite everything. "Sam, please tell me you brought a way to download the hegemony's biological warfare database. If we can get their research, we might be able to cure the void blight permanently." "Already on it," Sam replied, handing her a data extraction device. "Lead the way to their main laboratory." As they made their way through the ship, Rachel marveled at what she saw through the windows. Hundreds of ships from dozens of species, all working together to rescue one human scientist and stop a biological warfare program. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. In the hegemony's main laboratory, Rachel quickly identified the biological warfare research computers. The data extraction would take several minutes, but what she found made her gasp in amazement. "Sam," she said, staring at the computer screen, "they didn't just create the void blight. They have research on dozens of biological weapons, plans to target specific species' food supplies, even proposals to poison entire star systems." "How long to download everything?" Sam asked, keeping watch at the laboratory entrance. 5 more minutes, Rachel replied. "But Sam, there's something else here. They have the complete genetic sequence for the original void blight organism. If I can analyze this, I might be able to create a permanent cure that will restore all the damaged worlds." On the bridge of the Dominance, Admiral Vex Corvette watched his fleet being systematically disabled by the Allied forces. His weapons were offline, his shields were failing, and his crew was abandoning their posts. "Admiral," Commander Stelvorth reported, "the humans have reached our biological warfare laboratory. They're downloading our research data." Admiral Vex Corvette slammed his fist on the command console. "Destroy the laboratory. Activate the self-destruct sequence." "Sir, there are still crew members in that section of the ship." The Admiral drew his weapon and pointed it at his own officer. "I gave you an order, Commander." But before Commander Stelvorth could respond, the bridge doors opened and War Chief Zarn strode in, followed by a squad of Altarian warriors. The massive alien looked at Admiral Vex Corvette with disgust. "Hegemony leader," Zarn said in his deep voice, "you are responsible for the deaths of billions. You will stand trial before the Galactic Council." Admiral Vex Corvette raised his weapon toward Zarn, but the Altarian warrior was faster. With one swift movement, Zarn disarmed the Admiral and restrained him. "The age of artificial scarcity is over," Zarn declared. "The galaxy has chosen cooperation over conquest." 1 year later, Dr. Rachel Kim stood in a field of golden wheat that swayed gently in the earth breeze. But this was no ordinary wheat field. Growing alongside the earth grain were crops from dozens of alien worlds. Blue Altarian corn, crystalline Vorthak nutrition pods, and the glowing heat mushrooms that the Parathi loved so much. The first Galactic Harvest Festival was taking place on Earth, and representatives from over 200 species had come to celebrate not just the end of the hunger crisis, but the beginning of a new era of cooperation. "Dr. Kim," called Ambassador Lisa Parker as she walked across the field, The opening ceremony is about to begin. Are you ready? Rachel smiled and picked up a handful of the mixed grain. In her laboratory, she had created the permanent cure for the void blight, using the research stolen from the Hegemony flagship. But the real cure for the galaxy's problems had been much simpler, teaching people to share instead of fight. I'm ready, Lisa, Rachel replied. Let's go show the galaxy what we've accomplished together. The ceremony was held in a natural amphitheater carved into rolling hills outside Kansas City. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy filled the seats, while millions more watched the broadcast on their homeworlds. President Amy Johnson took the stage first, but her speech was brief. A year ago, the galaxy faced the greatest hunger crisis in its history. Today we gather to celebrate not just survival, but the discovery that our greatest strength comes not from competing with each other, but from working together. War Chief Zarn of the Alterians spoke next, his massive frame looking almost gentle as he addressed the crowd. My people were warriors for 1,000 years. We thought strength came from conquest. The humans taught us that true strength comes from helping others grow strong. Sea Mother Coral of the Thalassans spoke from a special water tank that had been built for the ceremony. In our oceans, we learned that the strongest reefs are built by countless small creatures working together. The humans reminded us that civilizations are the same. But the most surprising speaker was Commander Stelvorth, the former Hegemony officer who had helped capture Admiral Vex Corvat. After the battle at the Dominance, many Hegemony worlds had overthrown their military leaders and joined the Galactic Agricultural Cooperative. For decades, the Hegemony taught us that scarcity was natural and cooperation was weakness, Commander Stelvorth said, his voice carrying across the amphitheater. The humans proved that abundance is possible when people share knowledge and work together. My people are grateful to learn a better way. Captain Jake Martinez was called to the stage to represent all the human agricultural teams that had worked across the galaxy. As he looked out at the audience filled with species that had once been strangers and enemies, he thought about how much had changed. When Ambassador Parker first promised that humanity would feed the galaxy, it seemed impossible, Jake said. We were the newest species in the Galactic Council, with the least advanced technology. But we had one thing that made the difference. We had learned over thousands of years on Earth that survival means helping your neighbor survive too. He gestured toward the mixed crops growing in the fields around the amphitheater. What you see here isn't just human agriculture. It's Alterian grain engineering, Thalassan water management, Parathi nutrient enhancement, and innovations from dozens of other species. We didn't just teach the galaxy to grow food. The galaxy taught us to grow better food than any of us could have created alone. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause that mixed the sounds of hundreds of different species, chirps, whistles, musical tones, and rhythmic clicking blending together in a symphony of celebration. But the most important moment came when Dr. Rachel Kim took the stage for the final address. She carried with her a small vial containing the cure for the void blight, which had now been distributed to every affected world in the galaxy. 1 year ago, Rachel began, Admiral Vex Corvat told me that the natural order required the strong to rule and the weak to serve or die. He was wrong about many things, but he was especially wrong about what is natural. She held up the vial so everyone could see it. This cure was created using research from the Hegemony's own laboratories, combined with agricultural knowledge from Earth and genetic techniques from the Nixari. It required cooperation between former enemies to create something none of us could have made alone. Rachel set the vial down on the podium and looked out at the vast audience. The natural order isn't about the strong ruling the weak. The natural order is about life supporting more life. Plants enrich the soil that feeds them. Farmers grow crops that feed their communities. Teachers share knowledge that makes their students stronger. This is how nature really works, through cooperation, not domination. She gestured toward the mixed fields surrounding the amphitheater. What we've built here isn't just about agriculture. It's about proving that different species can work together to solve problems that seemed impossible. We've created something new, a galactic community based on sharing knowledge and supporting each other. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. The Hegemony created the void blight because they believed that scarcity and fear were the natural state of the galaxy. Rachel continued, but we've proven something different. We've shown that abundance and cooperation are not only possible, but more powerful than any weapon ever created. She picked up a handful of the mixed grain from the podium. This harvest represents crops from 200 worlds, grown using techniques shared freely between species that were strangers just 1 year ago. Every seed planted was an act of hope. Every harvest shared was an act of love. Rachel's voice grew stronger as she reached her conclusion. The galaxy cried for aid and humanity answered with endless food. But what we received in return was so much greater. We received a place in a community of species committed to helping each other not just survive, but thrive. Together, we have planted the seeds of lasting peace. As she finished speaking, something magical happened. Representatives from every species in the audience came forward to the stage, each carrying seeds or cuttings from their own worlds. Together, they planted a garden that would grow crops from every corner of the galaxy, tended by farmers from hundreds of different species. Later that evening, as the official ceremonies ended and the celebration continued into the night, Jake Martinez found himself walking through the fields with War Chief Zarn and Sea Mother Coral. "Human Jake," Zarn said in his deep voice, "my people have a saying. A warrior's greatest victory is the battle he does not have to fight. Your species won the greatest victory in galactic history by choosing to feed your enemies instead of fighting them." Sea Mother Coral's musical voice added, "In our oceans, we know that the healthiest waters are those where many species live together. Your species has helped create healthy waters for all of us." Jake looked up at the stars where he could see the lights of ships from dozens of worlds. Some were departing for home, carrying new seeds and agricultural techniques. Others were arriving for extended visits to learn more about sustainable farming. "You know what the amazing thing is?" Jake said to his alien friends. "We're all going to go back to our different worlds, with our different cultures and languages and ways of living. But now we're connected by something stronger than trade agreements or military alliances. We're connected by the knowledge that we can help each other succeed." The galaxy had indeed cried for aid, and humanity had answered with endless food. But the real answer hadn't been the grain or vegetables or techniques for growing crops in impossible conditions. The real answer had been the simple idea that when your neighbor is hungry, you share what you have. When your neighbor doesn't know how to solve a problem, you teach them what you know. When your neighbor is in danger, you help protect them. This was what humans called community, and it had spread from one small blue planet to encompass the entire galaxy. As the first Galactic Harvest Festival came to an end, representatives from hundreds of species made plans to return the following year, but they wouldn't be returning as separate, competing civilizations. They would be returning as members of a galactic community, united by the understanding that their greatest strength came not from what divided them, but from what they could build together. The age of artificial scarcity was over. The age of cooperation had begun, and in fields across 1,000 worlds, new crops grew under alien suns, tended by farmers who had learned that the most important harvest was not grain or fruit or vegetables, but the bonds of friendship and mutual aid that connected all living things. The galaxy had cried for aid, and received not just endless food, but endless hope for a better future built on the simple act of sharing what they had with those who needed it. In the end, that was the most human thing of all, and the most galactic.